Tonight we're going to be talking about the topic of integrity. And this was interesting because Tom and I were emailing back and forth and, I was asking some of the details about the night. And he said this was the topic. And without just saying, this is a really important topic. This actually probably, when I think about some of the other things being discussed, this is one of my favorite topics. Probably for a multiplicity of reasons. For one reason would be that I have experience in my own life as a type A personality, integrity to be a personal challenge for me in how I view myself. Like I set myself very high standards and I find that I'm not always living up to those standards. And so how do I match those two things together? And what often happens is that if you hold yourself to a high standard, then these are often things that annoy you about other people. Right? So I don't know if you've been around, like if you really value truth and you spend time around people who don't tell the truth, it can really get your goat, right? This is an area that I think is, for me, it really forced me to think deeply about it and biblically about it. So it was a good challenge to kind of sit down and say, okay, how do we communicate about this important topic of integrity? So here's where we're going to go tonight. I'm going to talk about what does the word integrity actually mean in the first place? Let's get a definition. And then we'll talk about the need for it in our culture and also individually in our own lives. And then I'm going to give you some biblical text, just a couple, on integrity. And then some application points. And then I've got some questions that you guys can kind of ponder and discuss in groups. All right? So let's jump in and talk about what the actual idea of integrity is. So if you look it up in a dictionary, it'll say, integrity is a state of being whole and undivided, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. And the first thing I want to point out is integrity is not first and foremost a moral question. So we're going to talk about the idea of integrity as a question of morality in a minute, but first we got to think about it not as a question of somebody who's moral or immoral, but just what does the term mean in that when it says it's something that's whole and undivided. And so I put this picture up here. Like a building foundation can have good integrity, but we wouldn't say that it was a moral or immoral foundation, right? Integrity means it's complete, it's whole, it's undivided. And so really when you think about that term, it's like when somebody says about a person, they say, that's not a very moral person. What they're meaning to say is that person's morals don't match up to my morals or the general culture's morals. But every person is a moral person. It's just that the question is, what are the morals by which they're living, right? And it's the same thing with integrity. So a person who, by all moral standards that we would have, that we would call that person evil, for example, they can actually have a high degree of integrity because they believe in living an evil life and they live an evil life. They are complete. They are systematically united with what they believe and how they actually live their lives. But in general, when we say someone's a person of integrity or something has integrity, we're talking about someone who is a moral person, and in our context, biblically speaking, what does the Bible describe morality to be? And that their life and their actions are consistent. And so they have a biblical morality they believe, and that's lived out in their lives. So they believe certain things, and based on their beliefs, this is how they live. And we would say that person is therefore a person with integrity. Okay? So integrity speaks of something being united. There's unity between the values and the actions, the beliefs, and how these beliefs are expressed. And we say this kind of in colloquialisms, and when we say something like, don't tell me you love me, show me that you love me. It's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to do it, right? And it's easy for us to say, well, really the actions are the things that matter. But it's both. Because if someone just shows love but never actually expresses love, that's the thing that's motivating them, most people don't feel loved, right? If I did very nice things for my wife all the time, but I never said to her that I care about her, or said it's motivated because I have a deep emotional connection to you, then she would say to me, I'm certain, I wish you would say it more. But on the other hand, if I only said it, and I never carried out actions of love, she would say, you talk a big game, but you don't live it out. She would say there's not integrity between what you say and how you're actually living. So integrity at its most core level is when we have something that's happening internally and it flows out into how we actually live out our lives. That's what integrity is. So let's talk about integrity in our culture today. Where do we see it, or maybe where is it lacking? Let's see if I can stir up some controversy here. Let's start in the top left there. I'm going to pick on all political parties. I'm an equal opportunist. This is not because I dislike either of these men in particular, but it's the nature of politics we've found, haven't we? That one of the biggest challenges for us in our culture is that when we hear a politician say X, and they get voted into office, and then they don't do X. Right? That's an issue across the board. When you ask your average American voter, one of their biggest challenges politically is because they basically say, I don't know if I can believe these people. And that fundamentally is a question of integrity. Are they just saying these things so that they'll get the right votes, and then when they get the votes, they'll get in and then they'll do whatever they want to do? That's a general feel amongst many voters in the United States of America. Down below that, I put a picture of a televangelist from yesteryear. There's a question of integrity that goes on there. Preachers say, if you send money in, the God's going to bless you, and He's going to do wonderful things in your lives. The people send money in, and they don't get blessed. And that many preachers are saying, I don't know if they're going to get blessed or not. I just want the money in the first place. So we would look and we would say, that person doesn't have integrity. They're saying one thing, but actually how they live their lives shows that those two things aren't connected. I put a picture of these big buildings just to think about many things that happened during the financial crisis about a decade ago. There were questions of integrity and how people were using and spending money, how people were loaning or not loaning money. Right next to that, you see a picture of a baseball with steroids injected into it. I mean, I can literally remember sitting and watching the television and seeing people like Jose Canseco and Roger Clemens and Rafael Palmeiro saying to the people to whom they were speaking, never did it, never touched it, don't believe in it, the game is pure. And then they test these guys and like, yeah, you're all on steroids. And you're like, what do I believe now? And if you're someone who follows baseball, you know when it comes to the question of Hall of Fame connected to guys who are caught up in the steroid abuse scandal, people always say there's going to be their name and the little asterisk next to it because we have questions about what they did or didn't do. Right? We know that integrity matters. We see issues in our culture. I put this picture on the bottom here of a flashlight because I've got a friend of mine who lives in Canada. He works with outdoor companies, and one of the things he does is he tests their products. Some of those products are flashlights. And he does a great job at getting this nighttime footage of these powerful flashlights throwing beams of light out into the woods or across a field. And he is regularly getting contacted by other friends of his who are saying, hey, did you know that some of these companies that sell flashlights on Amazon are just stealing your footage and your images and then tying it to their products and saying, look at what our product does when it's not their product at all. They're saying that's what our product does when in fact it has zero connection to what their product does. So we know, just kind of looking around in our culture, that integrity can be a challenge. And we also know at an instinctual level that it matters. I'm going to explain to you why I think at a deeper level it matters. Let me tell you a personal story from my own life about the topic of integrity. A handful of months ago, in probably less than 2 weeks, both my car and my wife's car died on us. Her car had died. We were borrowing a friend's car. I was driving down Haley Road to get to Kittery Point to the church building one night to teach a class, and I think I had 3 lights on my dashboard come on at once. So I just laughed, and I was like, okay, maybe we'll make it to the church. Maybe we won't. We'll see what Jesus wants to do here. So both of our cars died. So we were on this car hunting expedition, right? So it was like every single day on Cars.com and Car Gurus and CarMax. And so she was finding these deals all around. And then she found this amazing deal on a minivan, which we were going to drive from where we live in New Hampshire, south of Boston. It was about a 2-hour and 15-minute drive. It was going to be on a Thursday afternoon, I think it was. Take the kids out of school, run home, dump their stuff, and then hop in the car and drive all the way down. So she's talking to this lady on the phone, and she says, looks like you have a great deal in this minivan. We'd like to pay in cash. Do you take cash? She said, absolutely. She said, we'd like to talk to a salesperson on the floor about the price. Is it negotiable? She said, absolutely. We said, we don't want to drive all the way down there and then find out the car's been sold while we were on the ride. Can you save the car for us till we get down there? She said, absolutely. So we drove all the way down, and you can imagine it's when the kids get out of school, so 3 in the afternoon, and so we hit some of this traffic around Boston. We finally get down there. We get out of the van. We go inside. We see we got to get our car that we're borrowing. We get into the van. We take it for a test drive. We sit down after and we say, we'd like to offer you this for the van. And the guy looks at her and says, oh yeah, we don't negotiate on the price. It's just the sticker price. And so now we're looking at each other like, well, that's not what they told us. And she said, well, maybe we can talk about that. We'll see. And then she said, we'd like to pay cash for the whole thing. He said, no, you have to finance the entire thing. So at this point, we're thinking it's a great deal on this car, but these people have already told us 2 lies to get us to drive over 2 hours down to this place. Now, I want you to think, if something on that van broke 6 months down the road, they said, we'll cover it for a year. How much trust are we going to have that we can drive 2 hours down and they'll fix it for us? Probably not a whole lot. So let me just describe to you, for my family, just in this little incident, here's some of the costs. So we were told one thing. I changed my work schedule. I rush home. We get the kids from school. We dump their stuff. We go driving down to Boston. The kids are exhausted because they've been in school all day. So there's the kind of tax on our family. Then the cost of the drive. So we're going to drive probably 5 hours by the time it's all said and done. So there's the cost of the drive. There's the cost of dinner because we're down there and we got to feed the kids. And so we got to do that. We lose other options in the process because while we're pursuing that, other things are going on and off the market. So we're not going to be able to buy a different minivan because we're pursuing this one. And then just the emotional cost of me sitting there next to my wife who has had her heart kind of excited about this great deal, and then knowing that somebody on the phone lied to us in order to get us there. See, there's a cost for me personally when it comes to the topic of integrity, is that this guy didn't have integrity, and it hurt my family, right? So I'm driving home thinking about, can you imagine being the person who's told by somebody at some level, do whatever it takes to get them in the door? Yeah, well, they're going to drive 2.5 hours with their children. Doesn't matter. Whatever it takes to get them in the door. So we had the manager come out and he said, well, we'll work with you. Listen, we'll take out a loan and then you can pay it off immediately. And it's, it'll probably cost you $50 in interest. You pay it off after the first month. And I just looked at this guy and I said, you've taken us for a ride already to get us down here. Now you want me to believe that it's going to be that simple. I'm sorry, we're just not going to do business with you. And he was kind of like, well, okay, if that's what you want to do, you're losing a good deal. That's what integrity costs when we don't have integrity or a person doesn't have integrity. And that's just like one simple example from my life. I'm sure in your own life you've experienced things like this where integrity has stung you in some way. A lack of integrity costs us all in those areas. Integrity matters because it costs when we don't live that way. It costs financially, it costs emotionally, it costs in relationships or relationally. If you've been lied to by, or you have been the liar to a spouse, a friend, you've experienced the cost when integrity isn't there. When you say that you will do or you believe X, and then someone finds out that you don't, that person now looks at you in a different way. You've probably been on the giving and the receiving side of it, because that's part of living in a broken world, is that we're not always true to our word. If you've been on the receiving side of it, it makes you a little gun shy if you're going to trust that person the next time when they ask you to do something or promise something to you. And if you've been the one who has not had integrity as you engaged with somebody else, when they're hesitant back to you, you start to say, man, what did I do that caused this rift? Well, you weren't a person of integrity. So it costs us across the board. And I could go into example after example after example within our culture where integrity is just on a very base level. It is economically bad for us when we lack integrity. That's just the way the world works. Integrity matters, right? So with that as an understanding, with that as kind of a foundation here, I want to show 3 quick texts to you from the Bible. Let me give you the first one. This is from the top 10 list of the Old Testament. I'll read it to you in the English Standard Version. In Exodus chapter 20, when Moses is sharing the 10 Commandments with God's people, he says in Exodus 20:16, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." Modern translation, don't lie, i.e., tell the truth. Now, if you know anything about the Old Testament and all the laws, there are over 600 laws given. And yet, when we see a summation of the entire Old Testament law in Exodus chapter 20, and in another spot in the Old Testament as well, in the top 10 list is don't lie, i.e., be a person of integrity. You have to believe that matters if God would put it in this list. I always say it like this, right? There's 66 books in the Bible. There's only a certain number of verses and chapters and individual words. And yet, this is included. So if you read anything in the Bible, you're like, that's not important, it's probably important because it's in the book. And so in this top 10 list, we see integrity is a significant issue for God. Let me give you another passage from the book of Proverbs. Listen to this one. It says, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness, this crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. I want you to just see the picture is guidance, and on the other hand, destruction. We were talking about Proverbs this past Sunday in Kittery, and one of the things that's interesting about the book of Proverbs is that it's not meant to be a formulaic book, that life always works this way. It's a book of this is how the world generally operates. For example, when the book of Proverbs talks about working hard leads to good results and sitting around and doing nothing leads to bad results, we definitely know people who have not worked very hard, but they've gotten good results. Or people who are really hard and then they don't get good results. But the general way the world works is hard work equals good results. In the same way, this verse says, you have integrity, you'll be guided. You don't, you'll be destroyed. Now, I'm just lay out before you. I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to say, if someone said you have two options, well-guided or destruction, I think you would probably choose well-guided. Let me give you one more passage from the New Testament, and I want to give you some application points. This is from Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' kind of inaugural address. He's talking about what it means to understand and be part of God's rule and reign in the world, God's kingdom. And so as he lays out what a kingdom citizen looks like, the opening section is called the Beatitudes, where he talks about people who are going to be blessed, those who are poor in spirit, those who pursue the righteous life. He goes through a list of kind of what it means to live as a kingdom citizen, and then listen to this, in verse 33 of chapter 5. He says, again, you have heard it said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. So he's basically saying, don't make a promise and then not keep it. He goes on and this says, but I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's the throne of God, or by the earth, for it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. So he gives three things that we shouldn't do, and then he lands this section by saying this. Do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black, but instead let what you simply say be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. I mean, he takes the whole idea of making a promise or swearing by something. He says, here's how it should be. Say yes or no, and that's it. You may have heard this translated a little bit different. It may say, let your yes be yes, and your no be no. That's what a person of integrity actually looks like. So here's how I would summarize it if I were to describe what integrity is. You've probably heard this phrase said a little bit differently, like what you see is what you get. But for me, when I think of integrity, it's what I say is what you get. And so let me just place that as a challenge before you. When you speak, is what you say like a bond, like people can count on it, they can take it to the bank? Because I've got people in my life that when they say this, they do this. I also have people in my life when they say this, I plan about 6 or 7 options around that because this seems to rarely happen. Nobody wants to be that person. You want to be the person that your yes is yes and your no is no. So let me ask you then, can you apply this to your life? What I say is what you get. That's what it looks like to be a person of integrity. Here's some application points for us. How do you live a life of integrity? Number 1, look to the model. The word integrity has tied into this idea of integration. Who we are internally being lived out externally. And Jesus is the perfect model of this. Now, listen, let's just be honest, right? When we say, look to Jesus because he's the perfect model of integrity, you're like, thanks a lot, Captain Obvious. Obviously, he's the Son of God, right? It can be easy to be dismissive of Jesus, but when you read the Bible, it says that he was fully God and also fully man. And he could empathize with your weakness and with my weakness, and yet he was a person of integrity. The reason I bring this up is because you can think, well, if I just read about Jesus' life and how perfect he lived it and the man of integrity he was, I'm going to look and go, that's not me, I'm pretty bad at this. But haven't you been around people who excel at things, and just by being around them, you pick up some hints that here or there? You may be not so skilled in a particular area, but you spend some time around people who are skilled, and all of a sudden you start gleaning some of their skills. My brother Glenn, who is here, Glenn is an expert carpenter, and I've been on probably half a dozen mission trips with Glenn. Though my last name is Carpenter, that is not my skill set. So if you ask Glenn what I did on the mission trips, I was the runner. We unload the kids, they go and work with Glenn, and Glenn says, I need 5 of these, 7 of these, 12 of these, 4 of these, go to Lowe's. So I drive to Lowe's, I load everything up, I bring it back, and then Glenn builds houses. But just by spending time around him and listening to what he says, I start gleaning different things about how to do carpentry. Oh, when you mud, that's a good way to do it. Put your blade this way, and that's really good. It wasn't because I sat down and said, Glenn, teach me everything about carpentry, but being in his presence and watching him, I started to glean what it means to be good at something he's a professional at. And so in the same way, when you read the life of Jesus, here's what happens is that you have a picture of Jesus facing a situation that he handles perfectly. And could there be a chance that you're in that similar type of situation and you're like, hey, you know what? I just read this the other day. Jesus did this, so maybe I'll do the same thing too. My experience is that when I actually spend time studying the scripture, it's amazing how God takes that scripture that I studied and weaves it perfectly into my life. When confession, I read it that morning and I was like, I have no idea how this has any application to my life, God. And then all of a sudden, like Numbers chapter 6 comes alive. And I'm like, who would have thought Numbers chapter 6 in Starbucks, right? Like, that's how God works. He weaves his scripture into your life. So if you'll look to Jesus and say, what does it look like when he lives his life? He starts to give us a model. Okay, so that's kind of at the high theoretical, theological level. Here's another one. This is one of my favorite phrases. Say no to the good so you can say yes to the best. If you want to be a person who has a life defined by integrity, that means you're going to have to say this and do this. You can't say you'll do it and then not do it. Part of the reason we fail at being people of integrity is we just commit to too much. I'll do this, and this. And then when we say, okay, I'll do it, then we don't have time, and then we fall short. And then people say, well, I don't know if I can trust you. And the worst possible thing, because you've probably been the person saying it or hearing it, because I know I have, is when you try to explain. Now, let me explain why I didn't get that, and that done. And people are like, I don't want to hear the story. I just want you to accomplish what you said you're going to do. So if you will learn in your life to hone in on a few things and not commit to 10,000 things, you'll be able to accomplish those few things. That's just how life works. And so one of the blessings of our modern culture is you can hop on your phone, i.e. your mini pocket computer, and figure things out in 10 seconds, right? But the downside is that people can always ask you to do this, that, or the other thing. So let me tell you one of the little tricks of the trade for me is when I talk to people on Sunday or on Wednesday and other places, and they say, hey, I'd love to talk to you about this, I'd love to do this, I'd love to discuss this. This is what I say to them. Why don't you email me, and then we'll set a time up to do that. And sometimes people just don't follow through. And I'm like, well, I asked you to do it. You said yes, you didn't do it, so we don't have to do it. But if they do email me, then I can look at my schedule and say, yeah, let's make this time right here. This could work for us. Because what's really easy to do is say, yeah, next week we'll get together. And then that person calls you and I can't, I'm too busy. So, well, you told me you were going to do it. So just say yes to fewer things. And this is a process to learn to say, okay, this is a good option, but just because it's good, I don't have to say yes to it. I should say no to the good things so I can say yes to the most important things. That will allow you to be a person of integrity. You'll follow through on what you said you were going to do. Here's number 3. A regular connection to other men of integrity. We need people in our lives to tell us when we are not living an integrated life. Because the reality is, for you and for me and for every single human, we're terrible critics of ourselves. When we fall short in being people of integrity, the first thing in the back of our mind is like, let me explain why this was actually okay. And that's why you need a loving brother to look you in the eye and just go, bro, really? And then you're like, no, but let me explain. And they go, really? And that's when you're like, okay. Right? We need people to do that in our lives. And if you're married, I think sometimes our wives can do that. And other times, my wife's not the person I can hear it from. It takes another brother to say it to me, hey man, come on, what's going on with that? And say, okay, you're right. If you have no one in your life who's going to lovingly call you out, then living a life of integrity is going to be pretty challenging. So let me just ask you to think right now, when you hear that, are there any faces that come to mind, or is it a blank slate? Is there anybody in your life that you can say, that person lovingly holds me to who I say I'm going to be, how I'm going to live? Because if it's blank, then you got to get some of those people in your lives. And I realize that's not always easy to do, but you got to move in that direction. You will never be able to do it on your own. That's not the life we see pictured in Scripture of the solo Christian. Here's the last thing. Write it down. Before you make commitments to yourself, to others, and I'm not just talking about job things, but I'm going to do this, I'm going to do things differently. Writing it down does a lot of different things for you. Now listen, some of you may be journalers. I don't find myself to be a journaler. I'm a note taker, but I don't journal. I don't disagree with it for any reason. It just doesn't come naturally to me. But I do find when I write things down, it immediately forces me to say, okay, I said I'm going to do X, and then I write down, I will do X. And I look at it and I go, I'm not going to do that. Who am I kidding? Or I'll write it down and say, okay, now I wrote it down. Now I got to commit to it. Sometimes I'll write it down in my little journal that I keep, and then I'll take it out and put it on an index card, and I'll put it up in a public place so I can see it, so other people can see it. If you've been to my office, I got whiteboards everywhere you can look because I love to write things on whiteboards. And then as I'm sitting at my desk and I look up, it's staring me in the face, and oh yeah, that's what I said I was going to do. Writing things down also helps you process through it. You say, you know what, I'm going to do this thing because that person asked me. You write it down and you look at it, you say, why am I doing that? Am I doing that because I feel like I'm supposed to do that? Or am I doing that because that person made me feel guilty? Am I doing that because this person, I feel like I owe them something, and so I should probably do this so I can get them off my back? Simply writing something down will help you process through, are you going to follow through with it? Because the question isn't like, should you or should you not do it necessarily? More times than not, it's not a question of morality. It's a question of, do you have the bandwidth and the capacity to do it? And if you don't, then listen to this. It's an integrity issue 2 times. Because if somebody says, will you do this? And I say yes, knowing that I won't, now I just lied to the person, and now I'm not going to follow through. Just say no in the first place. It's a lot easier that way. This has become kind of a joke for the staff over at Kittery Point, because when we launched the campus, I said, we're going to do just a handful of things when we start this campus. We're not going to do 10,000 different ministries. I said, because when we start, we got to keep our energy focused on a couple things. So I said, we're going to do Sunday morning. We're going to do Wednesday night. We're going to do the MOPS group for young moms. We're going to do local missions. And we'll have maybe 2 or 3 other things that we're going to add into this equation. And so when people would come and say, hey, it would be great if we would do this, I would just say, nope, not now. And Paul, who's our student guy over at Kittery, he said, sometimes I think you said yes to the Kittery job just so you could say no to people when they ask if we can do these ministries. And I was like, ha, 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 it's true. Because I want to be a person of integrity. I want to say, yeah, let's do 10,000 things and then do them half-heartedly. Because then that's bad for the person, it's bad for me because I'm running too thin, and then the person gets a half-hearted ministry. That's not the right way to do it. So say yes to fewer things so you can actually do the right things. Writing things down will help you to make those decisions. Here's the last thing about writing things down. It will help you to see your progress. Because if you write something down and put it on an index card and you look at it, you say, okay, I'm going to do that. And a week later, you're like, no, I'm really going to do that. And then a week later, you're like, no, I swear I'm going to do that. You know what you do after that? You put the card in your drawer. Everybody ever do that one? Because you don't want to look at it anymore because it's staring you in the face saying, you haven't done this. So that'll quickly move you to places saying, I'm either going to do it or I'm not going to do it. Let me close with this line one more time for us. What I say is what you get. That's what it looks like to live a life of integrity. People can trust you that what's inside and what comes out of your mouth will be followed through in actions.